Ignacio Rizal Mercado y Alonso Realanda was born on June 19, 1861, in the Laguna province of the Philippines. He grew up to have an educational record as impressive as his name, but he is remembered for his efforts and dedication to the reformation of the Philippines. In this video, we will explore the life of one of the most revered figures in Philippine history. Before we delve further into the life of Jose Rizal, it's important to understand the political climate of the Philippines at the time. For this, we need to go back a few hundred years to the time of the famous explorer Ferdinand Magellan. In 1521, Magellan landed in Cebu while in service to the Spanish. A local chief persuaded Magellan and his crew to aid him in fighting with a tribe on Mactan, a neighboring island. Magellan was struck with a poisoned arrow and left to his fate by his crew. Despite the outcome of this first encounter and 3 other failed expeditions sent by King Philip II, after whom the islands are named, a permanent Spanish settlement was established in Cebu in 1565. By the end of the 16th century, the Spanish controlled many lowlands and coastal areas, from Mindanao to Luzon. The colonialists claimed ownership of thousands of islands, and anthropological scholars believe that the territory contained over 150 different cultural groups, many of which had their own language. This massive diversity made ruling particularly difficult for the Spanish, as they wanted to impose Western ideals and religion on the native islanders. Many communities were particularly isolated and retained their indigenous traditions, while others in the colonial center were subject to more overtly oppressive rule. Local histories were burnt, and anyone caught practicing indigenous traditions was punished. The Spanish still ruled the Philippines when Rizal was born in 1861. Rizal came from a relatively wealthy family of prosperous farmers. While his mother was Chinese and his father was Filipino, Rizal also had Spanish and Japanese ancestors. In 1849, the Governor-General of the Philippines decreed that any native or immigrant families should adopt a Spanish surname from an official list. Rizal's family name of Lamco was changed to Mercado, and subsequently, his father changed his name to Rizal at the suggestion of the provincial governor and family friend. When Rizal enrolled at the Ateneo Municipal de Manila, he dropped his last 3 names, on the advice of his brother Paciano Rizal Mercado, becoming Jose Protasio Rizal. Jose's brother was 10 years his senior and became involved in subversive political ideas after 3 friars he was close to during his studies were executed. In 1872, 200 Filipino workers and troops attempted an uprising. While the initial event was quickly crushed, the Spanish used the incident to clamp down on anyone who had ideas about governmental reforms. Several Filipino intellectuals were arrested, and many faced life imprisonment. 3 Filipino Catholic priests, amongst others, were publicly executed, although their connection to the uprising was never fully explained. This act made martyrs of the murdered priests and turned many people, including Paciano, to the cause of Filipino nationalism. After expressing his feelings of injustice regarding the executions, Paciano was prevented from completing his education by the school's authorities. Frustrated, he returned to his family's farm to concentrate his efforts on the family business. When Rizal enrolled in Ateneo de Manila, the name change suggested by Paciano enabled him to distance himself from any untoward attention that he may have received should he have been associated with his brother. Rizal flourished in education. He grew proficient in languages, won multiple prizes for his literary talents, and graduated from university, receiving a Bachelor of Arts with the highest honors. In 1882, Jose traveled to Madrid to continue his studies. Unbeknownst to his parents, Paciano had enlisted the help of their uncle, Antonio Rivera, to facilitate Rizal's travel abroad. Rizal enrolled at the Universidad Central de Madrid, studying medicine, philosophy, and literature. While in Europe, he was exposed to a more liberal attitude, and probably inspired by his brother's objection to the harsh rule of the Spanish colonists, Rizal began to commit himself to inspiring governmental reform in his home country. Amid a growing sense of Filipino identity, Rizal quickly became the leader of a community of other Filipino students studying in the Spanish capital. His first foray into publicly expressing political ideas was in the newspaper La Solidaridad. La Solidaridad was founded in Barcelona by Filipino journalist Graciano Lopez Haina. The publication promoted the need for religious and governmental reforms in the Philippines and became the voice of the propaganda movement. One of the issues that the propaganda movement highlighted was how the Philippines were kept from integrating with the colonialists. Public education had only been introduced to the Philippines in the 1860s, and even then, it was controlled by the Roman Catholic Church. Only a small portion of the Filipinos who went to school could write or read Spanish, and even fewer spoke it. In 1887, Rizal published his first novel. Originally titled The Social Cancer, the book was released as Noli Me Tangere, or Touch Me Not. In the novel's dedication, Rizal explains that the novel's name comes from a type of cancer that affected those afflicted so intensely that they could not bear to be touched. He felt that his country was suffering from a similar misfortune. Although the book's plot is entirely fictional, its historical backdrop exposed the corruption and brutality of the Spanish rule of the Philippines. Noli Me Tangere, written in Spanish, tells the story of Crisostomo Ibarra. The novel begins at a welcome party for the main character as he returns to the Philippines following 7 years of studying in Europe. Crisostomo's father passed away before his son's return, and Crisostomo discovers that he died in prison after accidentally killing a tax collector. He also learns that his father was falsely accused of other crimes by a Catholic priest, Father Damaso. Throughout the story, Crisostomo suffers at the hands of the priests, who interfere with his education, attempt to kill him, and insult his heritage. Ultimately, Crisostomo is framed for a rebel attack orchestrated by another priest, Father Salvi, and is reported to have died when attempting to escape from jail. The book was heavily critical of the Catholic Church and its role in aiding the Spanish colonialists. As the story rang true to many Filipinos, it sparked a movement for independence in the Philippines. However, the authorities soon banned the novel, and anyone caught reading it faced punishment. Rizal returned home on August 5, 1887, but he had become a target for the police and left the country 6 months later as he felt his presence endangered his relatives. He then traveled to France and Germany, completing his studies in ophthalmology. During Rizal's time away, the people of his hometown continued to suffer at the hands of the Dominican friars who owned the estate on which their farms and homes lay. On January 8, 1888, the people of Calambra submitted a memorial to the government listing their complaints, detailing their exploitation and the religious corruption. The case went to court, but the tenants lost. Their homes were burnt, and they were expelled from their ancestral farms at gunpoint. Included in this number were Rizal's father and 3 sisters, who were ultimately deported. In response to his critics and the continued persecution of his people, Rizal wrote many more articles and essays. In 1891, Rizal completed his second novel, a sequel to Noli Me Tangere, called Il Filibusterismo, also known by its English title, The Reign of Greed. The sequel follows a wealthy and influential Filipino called Simun, who is actually Crisostomo in disguise. He returns to the Philippines to use his wealth to try and start a revolution, overthrow the corrupt ruling class, and rescue his ex-fiancée. The book shows that Crisostomo is consumed by revenge, which ultimately goes unserved as his plot is uncovered at the crucial moment. It ends with Crisostomo dying by his own hand, but being told by a noble padre that God will forgive him due to his previous suffering. Ultimately, this novel again exposes the injustice of the system of government in the Philippines, but uses its main character to demonstrate that violence is not the answer. In 1892, Rizal returned to the Philippines. Determined to bring about reform without violence, he founded the Liga Filipina on July 3rd in Manila. Rizal hoped the League would foster a united spirit among Filipinos and offer mutual protection and support for its members. However, Rizal was deported to Dapitan after subversive pamphlets were found in his sister's suitcase, and he remained in exile for 4 years. Rizal made the most of his time in exile. He practiced ophthalmology, recorded examples of local flora and fauna, and built a school where he taught. He also planned improvements for the town and built waterworks. During this time, Rizal lost touch with the independence movement. Inspired by La Liga, Andres Bonifacio organized the first Filipino Revolutionary Party, known as the Katipunan. Rizal denounced the movement, which he saw as going against his intended pacifist methods. In 1895, Rizal applied for permission from the Spanish government to join the Spanish army in Cuba as a doctor. His petition was successful, and he traveled to Spain to enlist. Unfortunately, in August 1896, the Spanish discovered the existence of the Katipunan, which by then had an estimated 100,000 members. Upon the discovery, Bonifacio called for an immediate armed rebellion. As a prominent figure in the independence movement, Rizal was arrested on his way back to Spain, despite having no involvement in the Katipunan. Rizal was falsely charged with treason and sedition. Rather than receive a trial, Rizal was court-martialed and accused of establishing the Revolutionary Association. Behind the scenes, Rizal's enemies in the church and government ensured his conviction, and he was sentenced to death by firing squad. Rizal proclaimed his guiltlessness to the end, writing in a letter to a friend, "I am innocent of the crime of rebellion, so I am going to die with a tranquil conscience." The night before he was killed, he compiled the poem Mi Ultimo Adios, My Last Farewell, in which Rizal laments that he never saw his beloved homeland free from oppression. He smuggled the poem out of his cell, hidden in an old petroleum lamp he gave to his sister, whispering to her in English that there was something inside. Just before 7 a.m. on December 30th, 1896, Dr. José Rizal walked from his cell to the site of his execution. He had his arms tied behind his back, but he held his head high and kept a smile on his lips that proclaimed his conscience was clear. Reportedly, his last words were, "Consummatum est," it is finished, before the shots rang out that ended his life. The Spanish greeted the execution with cheers and cries of "Viva España," while the Filipinos looked on in silent rage. If the Spanish hoped that the death of Rizal would kill the nationalist movement, they could not have been more wrong. Rizal's murder added fuel to the revolutionary fire, and Rizal became a martyr for the cause. Just 2 years after his untimely demise, Rizal's beloved homeland was free of Spanish rule. The Philippine archipelago declared its independence on July 12, 1898. However, this was just the first step on the long road to autonomy, ending on July 4, 1946. Rizal remains a national hero of the Philippines and continues to inspire many with his patriotic devotion, compassion, and pacifist ideals. The national democracy in the Philippines today owes a great deal to the ideology of Dr. José Rizal. To learn more about the Philippines, check out our book, History of the Philippines, A Captivating Guide to Philippine History. It's available as an ebook, paperback, and audiobook.